Here with Legal Aid at Work. And the topic we'll be covering today is workplace rights for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. I'm here with Selah Steiger, who is our staff attorney, and my name is Natalia Gottschalk. Legal Aid at Work is a legal rights nonprofit. We were founded in 1916. Our services are available for all workers across California. We provide free educational tools, litigation. We have clinics and helplines. We also provide policy advocacy and direct representation. Today, we're representing specifically our Project Survive, which is our program that supports survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. We also support their families, their healthcare, and social service providers. Again, we provide free and confidential legal advice, representation, advocacy for change, outreach and community education, and digital and print resources. We believe really strongly that no worker should have to choose between being safe or keep working. And that's what our work is rooted into. So, of course, given our subject, we're going to cover some heavy topics. We won't be having any graphic descriptions, but we will be covering some scenarios where we'll talk about violence, assault, stalking. So this is just an invitation to take care of yourself however you need throughout this webinar. And if you would like to, go ahead and take a deep breath before we start. So this work is important to us because there are a lot of victims. These are some statistics that we have. There's over 200,000 victims each year of non-fatal violence who are missing work because of the violence. There's over 23,000 folks who are missing work because they have to care for someone who's a victim of violence who lives with them. And about half of these people are also losing out on pay because their absence from work wasn't protected by any sort of paid leave laws. And of course, these figures are very likely to be underreported. Here's a quick outline of what we're going to cover today. We're going to go into the legal definition of what is a victim or a survivor. We're going to talk about some recent legislation that affects this area of work. We'll be discussing specific workplace rights and protections, including safety-related accommodations, leave, pay, and protection against discrimination. And then at the end, we'll share some resources with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalia. And I see one question in the chat about the thumbs up function. I think we will be able to respond to questions in the chat potentially, but we also will hopefully have time at the end to just field questions. So, and we're happy to go back to different slides if there's questions about specific slides. There is a lot of information today and the slides are pretty heavy, especially with the translation. So we will share these out. And if you have questions at all, even after the fact, we'll also share our contact information so you can contact us directly. Thanks so much for being here. And like Natalia said, we're going to talk today about just different job protected leaves and access to accommodations for survivors of violence, as well as some paid wage replacement options as well. So I'm going to start today with who is a victim or a survivor. So when we're talking about legal definitions, often they have specific words, obviously, that kind of attach to who the law applies to. So the legal definition of a victim under the most recent laws that have recently actually changed and expanded for survivors of violence at work identifies a victim as an individual against whom a qualifying act of violence is committed. So this is regardless of whether anyone was arrested for, prosecuted for, convicted of committing any crime, and it includes domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, or an act or conduct that causes bodily injury or death of another individual, or in which someone draws, brandishes, or uses a firearm or other dangerous weapon with respect to another individual, or where an individual makes a credible threat to use force against another individual to cause physical injury or death. So this is actually not specific only to domestic violence survivors. It includes survivors of other qualifying acts of violence like I described. We will be using victim and survivor interchangeably in this training, and primarily we're talking about folks who experience domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. But please know that the law includes some other protections for just victims as well. Um, to appear in court or comply with a subpoena, a victim, for purposes of the law, means a person against whom a crime has been committed. And again, if there's questions about this or specific scenarios where you'd like to talk with us, please feel free to contact us individually. Next slide. So, like I mentioned, there actually have been some recent legislation in this space to improve and expand the laws for survivors. The first was AB 2992 in 2020. And this added safe leave to existing paid sick leave law to include paid time off under the paid sick leave law for survivors of violence. And it included, use of a written statement to certify, which we will talk about in a future slide. In 2022, AB 1949 introduced bereavement leave. So this actually is not specific to survivors, but it does benefit loved ones of victims of homicides, for example, or other incidents where someone unfortunately passes away. So we like to just include that. We like to include a lot of like newer laws so that people are aware and we can spread the word. The most significant law that we want to highlight today is AB 2499. This passed last year, but just became implemented January 1st of 2025. And honestly, a lot of people are still learning about it. This extended safe leave and other protections to loved ones, so employee loved ones of survivors who are helping care for those survivors. And it also moved protections in this area to the Fair Employment and Housing Act, which is a law in California that is enforced by the Civil Rights Department. So this change in the law, the aim of it is to increase enforcement because the Civil Rights Department um, has sort of more expansive and timely enforcement mechanisms. And so we like to talk about this law. We'll talk about some of the details today, but also please help us spread the word that it is now implemented. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about safety-related accommodations that are available to employee survivors as well as employee loved ones of survivors at work under this law. So an employer must grant a reasonable request from an employee survivor or an employee family member of a victim for reasonable safety-related changes on the job. Um, they have to be specific to the employee's safety in the workplace, and they are individualized. So that means each person will have basically their own specific request and based on their individual needs, for example, depending on what type of work they're engaged in. After receiving a request for a safety-related accommodation, an employer must participate in what's called the interactive process to determine if there are effective and reasonable accommodations for that employee survivor or employee loved one. So there is not an exhaustive list of what accommodations can be, but the law does provide some examples of what safety-related accommodations can be requested or could be helpful to a employee survivor. Some of them are listed here. I won't go through all of them, but for example, telecommuting, um, relocating a workstation or office space, if that would provide for additional safety for the employee, potentially modifying a schedule. So, for example, if it would be safer for the employee to work earlier hours rather than sort of getting out of work later in the evening, then that might be a possibility. Um, Definitely safety related, like physical changes to the workspace, such as installing locks, cameras, or other security equipment, and potentially even transfer to a different location if that's available. So, in order for the protections under the AB 2499 or this area of the law to apply, there are requirements to disclose status in order for the employer to basically be on notice and know that a person might need these type of accommodations or leave that we'll talk about in a little bit. So an employee must inform their employer that they are a survivor or that their family member is a survivor. Upon learning this information, an employer cannot retaliate against a survivor or family member for requesting a reasonable safety-related accommodation. And that is true even if the accommodation isn't ultimately granted. So essentially what needs to happen upon a request for this type of accommodation is that the employer needs to engage in the interactive process, which means that they discuss with the employee who's requesting the accommodation what might be available, and there's sort of a back and forth to determine what would work. An employer cannot retaliate against a survivor for making, or a family member for making that request. So additionally, an employer cannot discriminate against an employee because they are a survivor or a family member of a survivor. And to the extent possible, the employer must keep all information regarding these requests and also disclosure of status confidential. They would have to inform the employee before there was any type of disclosure to any third party. So we've reached our first scenario. We're going to talk about Carolina. Carolina is a survivor of domestic violence, is concerned that the person who abused her will come to her workplace. And so, what are some examples of changes she could request from her employer to feel safer?
The chat should be open for everyone to join in if you want to share any responses in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you.
I see one question in the Q&A that I think would be good to answer now. It says that it seems odd that a family member can request an accommodation on behalf of an employee. So the family member would be the employee also. So these protections apply to an employee who is a survivor, and then also a family member who's an employee, most likely of a different company or organization, who would request accommodations to be safe at work based on their um, association and care for a family member who is a survivor. Does that clarify? Okay, we can also return to that. So let's look at the chat. Yes, great. Thank you so much for your participation. Um, can advance the slide. So, like we said in a previous slide, there are different accommodations that could be available to Carolina. maybe working from home, transfer to a different location, maybe a different work schedule. And what would she need to do to request these accommodations? Can advance the slide. So she would have to provide disclosure, so inform her employer that she is a survivor, and then provide certification if necessary, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and then request the accommodation from her employer directly. So I'm going to move now to talk about leave from work. So there are a few different ways that employees can access leave from work. Some of them are specifically related to domestic violence, and then some of them are related to conditions that could be related to an incident of domestic violence or abuse, but also apply to other situations. So we'll talk about all of them, and we'll try to note where there is, basically an option to apply for these type of leaves or request these type of leaves that are related to, domestic violence and a disclosure therein, or if they might be available without disclosure because they just might apply to a specific scenario. Um, so the first is job protected safe leave. And that is leave that is available for different levels of employer threshold. So if an employer has 5 or more employees, they must provide leave to employee survivors to appear in court. So, for example, to comply with a subpoena or other court order, as a witness or in any judicial proceeding, or to obtain civil or criminal legal services. So, for example, to seek a temporary restraining order or other injunctive relief to help ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the survivor or their child. Again, employers cannot discharge or discriminate against survivors who take time off work for these purposes. And these protections are, pretty specifically related to court-related appearances and criminal and legal services. And it applies to employees at smaller businesses as well. So any employer with 5 or more employees, employees can access this job protected safe leave. If the employee survivor or the employee family member of a survivor works for an organization or company that has 25 or more workers, then that survivor employee or the employee family member can seek other safety related services. So they can take time off to seek or obtain child or dependent adult care if it's necessary to ensure that child or adult dependent safety, to receive medical attention, to receive services such as information and support from a shelter, program, rape crisis center, or victim services organization. Also to receive psychological counseling or mental health services, to participate in safety planning, or even to relocate or engage in the process of securing a new residence. So reasonable notice should be given before taking time off, both for the employee survivor and if there's a employee family member of a survivor who is requesting time off to assist with some of those options. Unscheduled time off is still protected so long as the survivor provides certification within a reasonable amount of time. Survivors may be limited to taking 12 weeks total of protected leave. And again, this is specific to basically those different safety-related service options. So any of those reasons, but it could be a maximum of 12 weeks. And then for a family member employee, so a family member of a survivor who's requesting time off to assist that survivor or care for them, They may be limited to taking 5 or 10 days of protected leave, depending on the reason for leave under this law. So 12 weeks for the survivor employee themselves, and then limited to either 5 or 10 days, depending on the situation, of protected leave for the family member of the survivor to assist with seeking those services. So for all aspects of this law, including the accommodations that we talked about previously, employers can request certification of the domestic violence, for example, or status basically of the survivor um, or survivor or family member. This can be a letter that's signed by a domestic violence or sexual assault counselor or a healthcare provider or someone who is providing services to the survivor. It can be a more formal document like a police report or a court order documenting the violence, or potentially a restraining order if one has been issued. And importantly, it can also just be a written statement from the survivor, signed by them, verifying the crime or abuse that occurred. An employer can request that a survivor provide recertification every 6 months. And we like to note where we can that citizenship and immigration status do not affect eligibility for these laws. So there are some aspects of the wage replacement programs that may have determination related to status. But these laws apply no matter, other than the employee threshold, like where you work and how you work. So we have our next scenario now, and we're learning about Dominique. Dominique needs to take time off for going to court to request a restraining order. She needs to also seek services from a victim services provider, move into her mother's house for her safety, and arrange childcare during the move. So, which of these are legally job protected under the laws I just talked about for Dominique to do? Any ideas? Great. Thank you so much for your responses. We can advance the slides. Great job, everyone. All of them. Excellent. So as long as Dominique has 25 or more employees at her job, so she works for an employer with at least 25 employees or more, she can take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave under the safe leave law. And importantly, what does she need to do to request this time off? You can advance the slide. So the first step would be informing her employer that she is a survivor, and requesting the time off from her employer directly. If the employer requests it or requires it, then she should provide certification, and it can be any of those methods that I mentioned before. We have a secondary question here. Can Dominique's mother take time off from her job to help with the move, help find childcare, and support Dominique at the court hearing? Yes, I see someone saying yes, yes, great. Yes, so she should follow the same steps as Dominique. So this is a great example, actually, that kind of is responsive to the previous question. So most likely Dominique's mother works at a different company, but she would follow similar steps with her employer. So she would basically inform the employer that she's a family member of someone who is a survivor and who needs support, request the time off from her employer directly, and possibly provide certification if the employer requires it. Dominique's mother can take up to 5 or 10 days off, depending on the reason, under this law. And again, she has to work for a company that has 25 or more employees also for this law to apply.
We did have one question in the chat that's in Spanish. It says, if there are fewer than that, does it not apply? I'm assuming it's referring to fewer than 25 employees.
Yeah, so the distinction is in order to support a survivor or attend for the survivor employee themselves, those court or civil or legal related protections. So to obtain a restraining order, to comply with a subpoena, for example, to appear as a witness, those reasons are covered for anyone who works for an employer with 5 or more employees. For this leave to be accessible, um, in order to seek services and for a family member to take time off to support someone seeking services, the employee has to work for a company that has 25 or more. I saw one other question about whether or not there's a fact sheet about these laws, and there actually is. We ourselves are working on a fact sheet and sort of a toolkit at Legal Aid at Work. But the California Civil Rights Department also has prepared a fact sheet, and we will share the link with that definitely either in the slides or after the webinar today.
Yeah, I believe we have the link for that in the slides. And we'll share these materials after the presentation. Um, okay, so I'll be talking about a couple other different forms of protected leave. So under the California Family Rights Act, there is up to 12 weeks of leave that is job protected, unpaid, and workers can use this to bond with a new child in their home, care for a family member that is on this list, or care for their own serious health condition, or attend to needs related to military deployment. A family member does include, like I said, the people on this list and also a designated person, which can be someone close to the worker um, that they would like to take this leave to care for. Workers in California are eligible for this job protected leave if they work for an employer that has 5 or more employees, if they've worked with that employer for over a year, and if they have worked for more than 1,250 hours in the year before their leave begins, which works out to around 25 hours a week. They may be required to provide medical certification if they're taking the leave to care for their own serious health condition or to care for a family member that has a serious health condition. And again, for this protection, citizenship and immigration status do not affect a worker's eligibility. So under the California Family Rights Act, or you'll see it's abbreviated as CFRA or CIFRA, um, it does outline what counts as a serious health condition, and it's described as a physical or mental condition, impairment, illness, or injury that's involving either continued treatment by a healthcare provider or inpatient care. Some examples that might be particularly relevant to survivors are things like PTSD, anxiety, depression, injuries from the violence, or recovery from surgery. The Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, is refers to the federal law that provides protected leave. CFRA provides the same rights and protections that are covered under FMLA as well as some others. So you'll hear us mostly talking about CFRA for this reason. FMLA and CIFRA both run concurrently. They run at the same time. If someone is eligible for both of these types of leave, they're still only entitled to 12 weeks a year. They wouldn't be entitled to additional leave. And then the other type of leave that we talked about previously, victim-related safe leave, also runs concurrently yes, with both FMLA and CIFRA. So for someone who's eligible for FMLA and CIFRA and safe leave, they can't stack all these different leaves. They would be taking them at the same time. Another type of leave is protected under the Americans with Disability Act and the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, and it is leave considered as an accommodation for a disability. Workers with disabilities have the right to request reasonable accommodations at work, like we already covered, unless they cause an undue hardship for the employer. And so a leave of absence, taking time off work, can count as one of these reasonable accommodations that a worker could request from their employer in order to meet a need for their disability. The employer may require medical certification. And again, for this type of leave, citizenship and immigration status do not affect eligibility. So this chart and the next slide has a comparison of the different types of leave that we've covered. So I'm not going to go into it too detailed. It's more for folks to refer to later if they want to see how the different types of leave compare. So we have leave to go to court to seek safety, leave to seek services, leave to care for one's own serious health condition under CFRA, and also leave as an accommodation for a disability. And the differences between the different types of leave, like we talked about, like you could see here, is whether there's a requirement for certification, whether the employer can claim undue hardship, what the tenure or hours requirements are, and whether there's a minimum the employee is required for the leave to be protected.
Oh, sorry, Natalia, before we get into this example, and I think it will provide more information, but like I sort of said at the top, there are some leaves that apply to situations that aren't exclusive to domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other forms of violence. So the California Family Rights Act, like Natalia mentioned, provides job protected leave if an employee is eligible for the purposes of this webinar, leave to care for their own serious health condition or leave to care for a family member with a serious health condition. So that could be applicable in situations involving domestic violence, but importantly, there are not disclosure requirements for those laws. So there would be the requirement of a medical certification, most likely. But I like to include that in case you're working with someone who does not feel comfortable disclosing their status as a survivor, if they would be eligible for either leave for themselves or caregiving leave under the California Family Rights Act, then that could be an option. Um, Similarly, the leave as an accommodation for a disability has sort of different requirements. The person has to basically have a disability, but that could be something that occurs in a situation of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And then there's sort of like a different it's a different law, and so therefore disclosure of the domestic violence incident or status as a survivor may not be necessary. And so we just like to include all of these types of leaves because they apply to different situations and potentially could cover someone in a unique situation where potentially they are not wanting to disclose. Again, all of this is complicated. There's sort of things that kind of run on top of each other and can be very specific to the individual who is requesting leave. And so we will share our advice helpline a little bit later. We're also available for technical assistance if you are working with patients or clients who need support in these types of areas. But I just wanted to clarify that aspect. And I think like the scenario that we're heading into might help as well.
Thank you, Sayla. Okay, so I'm going to share our next scenario. This is about Lucas and his husband, Chris. Lucas was attacked by an ex who had been stalking him. He's going to need surgery as well as physical therapy and treatment for PTSD. So if you'd like to answer in the chat, can Lucas take job protected time off from work under California Family Rights Act? The next question under there is how much time can he take off? If you'd like to also answer that. Okay, so I see a lot of yeses. It's true. So yes. So and yeah, if he meets the eligibility requirements, so if his employer has 5 employees or more, if he's worked there over a year, and if he's worked 1,250 hours in the year before the time off request. Um, and then, like a lot of you have also answered correctly, he can take up to 12 weeks off. There's a question in the chat asking if PTO can be used in addition to these hours.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about wage replacement in a little later. So far, we have only talked about leaves and accommodations that are related to just the job. So, job protected time off that is unpaid by the employer. So if it's okay, we can maybe return to this question once we're talking about the pay portion. In California, the pay that's available for these types of leaves is also a bit complicated, but I'll be sure to make a note about PTO specifically when we get to those slides.
All right. And then a couple questions here about Lucas's husband, Chris. So to care for Lucas, Chris is wanting to take time off of his job to help Lucas recover. Can Chris take time off under CIFRA? Similarly to Lucas, if he meets those same requirements, if he's worked for 1 year for an employer with more than 5 employees and 1,250 hours before he takes that leave. And he can also take up to 12 weeks off. If Lucas needs more time than 12 weeks, or if Lucas is not eligible for CIFRA if he doesn't meet these eligibility requirements, could Lucas, the person who was attacked, still take leave to recover? Yes. So we talked about leave related to a disability related reasonable accommodation. It's protected under ADA and FEHA. So he may be able to request leave as an accommodation. Another form of leave that's available for workers in California is the California Paid Sick or Safe Leave. This is the only type of leave that we will talk about that provides both job protected time off and pay during that time off. It's available for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking to seek medical treatment for injuries, receive services, receive counseling, or participate in safety planning or relocate for their safety. They can also use this time off to seek any diagnosis, care, treatment, or preventative treatment for themselves or for a family member. Um, this type of leave is available to use after a worker has been at their job for 90 days, but they do start accruing it immediately. They will accrue 1 hour of this leave for every 30 hours worked. In California, employers can limit this leave to 5 days or 40 hours every year. And then there's some local jurisdictions that provide additional time off. For example, in San Francisco, employers with more than 10 employees are required to provide 72 hours a year. For paid sick and safe leave, immigration status and citizenship status does not affect someone's eligibility to accrue or to use this type of leave. A couple other types of leave that are available to workers, including survivors, that we wanted to mention. There is pregnancy disability leave laws protected in California that provide up to 4 months of unpaid leave for folks who need to take time off for prenatal care, childbirth, and recovery after giving birth. There's also protected reproductive loss leave. So for workers who are planning on becoming parents, they can take up to 5 days of unpaid time off after a reproductive loss, including a miscarriage, stillbirth, or the end of a pregnancy. There's also bereavement leave, which we mentioned previously, up to 5 days of unpaid leave following the death of the people in this list, a child, spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, grandchild, domestic partner, or partner-in-law, or parent-in-law. And then there's the Family School Partnership Act leave, which provides time off for enrolling in school, for school activities, or for emergencies. Now I'm going to talk about wage replacement, so pay during time off that's available for workers. Um, I just mentioned paid sick or safe leave. Like I said, that's the one type of leave that provides both protected time off and also pay during that time off. Some survivors might be able to access either local or state victim or survivor funds, something they should talk to their service providers about. And then we're going to explain these three programs from the California Employment Development Department, or the EDD. I'll be talking about state disability insurance, paid family leave, and employment insurance. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about how specifically SDI, state and disability insurance, and paid family leave fit together with the forms of job protected leave that we already explained. So state disability insurance, or SDI for the initials, provides partial wage replacement to workers who are unable to work due to their own disability or due to injuries. They can receive this for up to 52 weeks. Workers are still available to receive this income even if they've been laid off or terminated from their jobs. And it replaces 90% of their income for most workers, for folks who are earning up to or less than around 63,000 a year. And then for folks who are higher earners, it replaces up to 70% of their income up to a limit. There is a 1 week unpaid waiting period. So once people are approved, they'll have to wait 1 week before they can start receiving their benefits. And workers are eligible for SDI if they are unable to work because of their health. Um, there is a separate program if their injury is related to their workplace. It's workers' compensation. We won't really be explaining that right now. Um, Workers are eligible for SDI if they're losing income because they're unable to work, and they have to have paid into the fund. And usually you see this as a deduction on a paycheck under CA/SDI or sometimes just SDI. And those deductions have to have been paid within the last 4 to 18 months. For state disability insurance, citizenship status and immigration status have no effect on someone's eligibility. Paid family leave is the program that provides partial wage replacement to workers who are taking time off because they're bonding with a new child or attending to needs related to a military deployment or because they're caring for a family member. Um, as of now, family member includes parent, spouse, domestic partner, child, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, and parent-in-law, but we did, or the governor just signed a bill that will add designated person to this list. So that's really exciting. That'll start in the next couple years. So folks can also access this wage replacement to care for a chosen family member, someone who is not on this list that needs their support. Just like SDI, PFL provides up to or 90% of income for most workers, 70% for higher income earners, up to a limit. Paid family leave is paid out for up to 8 weeks. There's no waiting period. Folks can still receive this even if they've been laid off or terminated from their jobs. And just like SDI, they have to have paid into the California SDI fund, that deduction from their paychecks, in the last 4 to 18 months. And just like SDI, citizenship and immigration status do not have an effect on eligibility. And unemployment insurance is the EDD program for survivors or for workers who have had to leave their employment. Typically, workers cannot apply for unemployment insurance if they have left their job voluntarily, unless they have something that's referred to as a good cause. So survivors who have had to quit their jobs because of their or to protect their safety can list that as a good cause. Good cause includes leaving a job to protect the worker or the worker's children from domestic violence. To establish this good cause, the survivor has to show that either they or their children experience an act or threat of domestic violence abuse, or that they have a restraining order, police report, or any other information that identifies the abuser and verifies the abuse. And they also need to show that a leave of absence or a transfer was not available or would not have resolved the problem. Typically, unemployment insurance is paid out by an employer's reserve account, but for survivors of violence, an employer's account is not charged as long as the employer notifies the department of what's going on. Unlike SDI and PFL, citizenship and immigration status do have an effect on eligibility. Folks who are undocumented are not able to apply for unemployment insurance. I did say a question, will the slides be shared to the attendees? Yes, we're going to share our presentation materials and also a recording of this training. And here's another chart, again, for your reference, comparing the three programs from the EDD that we just broke down: state disability insurance, paid family leave, and unemployment insurance. Something really important here is that workers cannot receive or apply for more than one of these benefits at one time. These benefits cannot overlap with each other since they have different reasons for being, different reasons for eligibility. Folks can only apply for and receive one of these programs at a time. If a worker does receive overlapping benefits, they may have to pay a penalty and also the overpayment amount back to the EDD. And the way to apply to each of these benefits, SDI, PFL, unemployment, is through the Employment Development Department directly. There's an online application available at their website, and there's also the option to request a paper application that can be sent in the mail. Our next scenario is about Aisha and Fatima, two sisters. Aisha's sister Fatima recently fled from her abusive spouse. Fatima is experiencing severe anxiety due to the abuse. She left her job, she left Sacramento, and she moved in with Aisha in Oakland. Aisha needs to take time off work now to help care for Fatima. So both of these sisters are not working. Can anyone share in the chat what type of income they might be eligible to receive during this time that they're not working? Either Fatima or Aisha. Okay. Thank you for your participation. So focusing on employment, PFL for the sister, PFL. So let's look at, I believe, Fatima first. So because Fatima is experiencing severe anxiety, she has a serious health condition, she can apply for state disability insurance. Even though she left her job, she can still apply for and hopefully receive this income. Aisha, like some of you correctly said in the chat, can apply for paid family leave because she's providing care for a sister that has a serious health condition. So And alternatively, if Fatima were not experiencing severe anxiety or any other health condition, could she or Aisha still receive income during their time off? So Francisca in the chat did mention unemployment. Catalina is saying yes. So for Fatima, she could apply for unemployment insurance because she does have good cause for having left her job voluntarily. Aisha unfortunately cannot apply for paid family leave because she's not, even though she is providing care for her sister, she's not officially providing care for someone who has a serious health condition. Um, Aisha could use paid sick days, paid sick or safe leave if she has that accrued, or any other PTO that she might have available.
I'll just jump in here to answer more thoroughly the question about PTO. So, for the job protected leaves, the idea sort of is that these wage replacement programs could potentially be available to correspond with those job protected leaves, with the exception, like Natalia said, of paid sick and safe days. Paid sick and safe days can be used by the survivor themselves as well as by someone who's caring for a survivor. There are, specific enumerated people who can be included in taking off paid sick leave to care for a family member and help them with access to medical appointments and things like that. Um, each employer may also have their own PTO sort of like accrual system. That's very common. So under paid sick and safe leave, there's a minimum of 5 days per week or 40 hours once you have worked enough time in California to accrue that amount of time. But many employers do have their own policies related to PTO and also their own sort of explanations of what that PTO time can be used for. So again, if there's specific scenarios where someone is concerned about that, they can always contact us. But actually, the employer might have more information or details about what PTO that's administered through the employer could be used for.
Thank you, Zayla. Okay, we're going to circle back to our last scenario of Lucas and Chris. We talked about how Lucas, who was the person who was attacked, can take time off to recover, and then Chris, who's his husband, can take time off to care for him. So we wanted to kind of bring this back to talk about the pay that they would be receiving during that time off, so you can see how it fits together. So assuming both Chris and Lucas are eligible for SIFRA, right? So they work with employers with more than 5 employees. They've worked there over a year, more than 1,250 hours in the year before leave. Lucas could take the 12 weeks off, up to 12 weeks off that we had talked about before. If he needs additional leave after that, he could request it as a reasonable accommodation for his disability. And he can apply for state disability insurance and possibly receive that income for up to 52 weeks. Chris could take up to 12 weeks of job protected leave covered by SIFRA, and he could apply since he's caring for his husband for paid family leave and receive up to 8 weeks of wage replacement. Now we'll talk about protection against discrimination. An employer cannot discriminate based on an employee's or their family member's known status as a victim of a crime or a family member of a victim of a crime, including domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. The ADA and FEHA specifically prohibits discrimination against employees with mental or physical disability and also prohibits retaliation for employees who have requested a reasonable accommodation. Some examples of discrimination and retaliation, I won't go over all of them, but they can be things like reducing pay or hours, treating someone worse at work, disclosing any confidential information. And now we're going to share some resources with you all. We have some specific resources for certain populations. So we have a resource for undocumented workers that goes really in depth into how undocumented workers can apply for state disability insurance and paid family leave. It's available in multiple languages. We also want to highlight that all the rights that we described in this presentation apply to any workers regardless of their gender identity or their sexual orientation. And then federal workers, they do have slightly different rights. They are not covered by California laws, and we have a resource that we can share that goes into a little bit more about their rights. This is our helpline and our website, a link to our website. Folks can call us for free and confidential legal advice. We love to hear from survivors, the folks that are helping them out, including their loved ones and their social service providers, their healthcare providers. Like Salem mentioned, we provide technical assistance to providers as well. So give us a call if you have any needs for support. And then these top two resources are from our team. This is kind of a fact sheet on domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and my job. And then this one is similar, but it's specifically more towards disability and for caregivers. These last two are resources from the Civil Rights Department. So the first is a series of, I think it's frequently asked questions from survivors of violence and their family members regarding their right to leave and accommodations. And the second one goes more into workplace retaliation. That's the end of our presentation. We do have until 12:30 here. We'd love to hear any questions that you have, if there's anything you'd like us to explain more in detail.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. We know this material is quite dense, and we've gone through the slides to sort of give an overview, but we are more than happy to return to slides and explain things again or answer any questions you might have, with the caveat that if it's like a specific client-related scenario, we might ask that you come to us over the phone so that we can give just more specific confidential legal advice. Any other questions that we have not already addressed? Want to give just also a huge thank you to our interpreters for this session. So we have a question about what is considered undocumented. For the purposes of state disability insurance and paid family leave, we, like Natalia said, have a guide that offers some more detailed, sort of like practical advice for applying for those programs. Um, because the online version of those applications require that someone enter a social security number into the field to access the application. And so our advice for folks who may be um, not maybe working under a different number, or um, for example, we encourage just to leave that portion of the application, request a paper application, and then leave that portion of the application completely blank. Unfortunately, at this time, that's not an option on the online version of the form. But again, if there are further questions or more detailed information can be found in the guide, which Natalia has just shared a specific link in the chat. Um, and again, if there are, I know I'm a broken record, but we really do encourage you to call us and share this line with patients and clients alike if they have questions specific to their situation that we might be able to support, even including questions about applications to the wage replacement programs through the EDD.
Yeah, I added a couple. I added that undocumented workers guide in the chat in both English and Spanish, and our Project Survive helpline, and also the link to the Civil Rights Department frequently asked questions for survivors of violence and their family.
Any other questions? I think if not, I'll just say again, like we know that a lot of this material will, take a little bit to sink in. And of course, like we said before, there's sort of overlapping things that could apply to different patients or clients that you might have. And so really, we just want to share the word about all these laws and that there are protections available to survivors. And if you're thinking like, oh, I attended that training, and I think like there's someone who is, experiencing a need for support, specifically in employment-related concerns about taking time away from work to attend to, seeking services or safety relocation or other things, definitely just feel free to reach out to us or point them in our direction so we can speak with them one-on-one. We really appreciate all of the work that you all do. We really feel so happy to be able to be in community with you and share the work in supporting our community members in whatever situations they encounter, and making sure that they can preserve their jobs and income as well. So yeah, thank you everyone. And if there are questions that come up, later, that you are, occur to you at a later time, feel free to email us also. Um, and if otherwise, we'll stay on for just a few more minutes if folks want to ask questions. But thank you for your time today and have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thank you all. Thank you so much again to our interpreters too. We really appreciate you and know we are fast talkers. So thank you so, so much for your support in this training as well. Yes, happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Looks like most participants have trickled away. So again, thanks everyone for your time. And I'm going to
Thank
close out.
you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.